everybody. My name is Smita Kapoor and I'm the CEO and co-founder at KelpHR. Today we have on our show a special guest, Sandhya Menon. She's a former journalist, a writer, and a communications person, AVP Communications at Wells Fargo. Welcome, Sandhya.
Hi, Smita. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I've heard so many things about you. I have always read news around you, about your writing, very fearlessly written articles. So amazing. I'm so impressed. Thank you very much for honoring us to have you on this show. Yeah.
Thanks. It's really, the pleasure is mine entirely.
So, Sandhya, beginning with a conversation, I have seen that you have been an advocate of the Me Too. Me Too, if you look at, it goes in our history for the Prevention of Sexual Harassment law, how strongly it was implemented, and people accepting it. Law was just in papers, but how it got executed, how it is implemented, I think Me Too plays a very strong role. And people like who really spoke about it, wrote about it, went through the whole fiasco. I think hats off to all of you, because now people are worried about, um, you know, uh, there were people who used to were borderline harassers. Okay, there's a very strong message down there saying that now people won't keep it. So thank you very much for that bit.
That's so good to know, Smita, especially at a time when, a defamation suit, Priya has won the defamation suit that MJ Akbar, filed on her. And I'm thinking at this point, the Me Too movement, a lot of pushback during the Me Too movement was, about why did you keep quiet for so long? What proof do you have? Which I find completely ridiculous. A harasser is not going to harass a woman with, right? So this idea of proof was ridiculous. And finally, why are you doing this on Twitter? If you have a genuine case, go to the police. Otherwise, you're just asking for your attention seeking. And the judgment against it this time, I think, is what has really bolstered the Me Too movement in India, where the judge has actually said she can choose the time and the place she wants to talk about her grievance. And the judgment noted that sexual harassment happens when no one else is around.
Yes.
And that was so amazing, right? It gives validity to everything that all of us have been doing for so long. So it's, yes, thank you for bringing it up. It's a great moment to talk about Me Too right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Priya Ramani's case is such a case law for us to all study. One very important aspect which gets pushed is that what is written in law has to be followed to the T. Yeah, that is my other concern that I always have when I sit on committees, because I have legal folks who keep pushing me back saying, Smita, but it is not written here, so how do you speak about it? And I always push the aspect of spirit, which doesn't go well.
Yes.
Doesn't go too well. Okay. So yes, there has been a pull and push, but it is good that somebody, you need a strong opposition. Otherwise,
yeah. That's when you refine something to, it's like polishing a diamond, right? It's got to have opposing forces to shine. So, yeah.
So Sandhya, moving a little bit, and as a working woman that you have been, and you've been very bold about some of the aspects, right? Like your mental health. Okay, so we would want to hear from you that a working woman and a mental health, how does it go about, right? How does it both mingle? What do you think are typical challenges of a working woman with regard to mental health? And what do you think, your thoughts about it?
So I think this is a good time to keep to talk about mental health, because the conversation has become so strong in circles that we talk in, whether that's English speaking, educated media people, or just generally mental health is a big conversation. But it's always in it's more or less in context or in connection to living your life well. And we rarely talk about mental health or mental illnesses, particularly in connection to work right? So yes, the only connection that we make between mental health and work is stress, or is workplace bullying and harassment, where it adds to the stress and everything. But there's a completely different aspect that I'd like to particularly touch upon, is the mental health aspect of it itself, which is when men or women are not diagnosed with any particular mental illness, but uh, that doesn't mean they're perfectly healthy, right? Stress weighs on people. Stress affects performance, or hostile workplaces. All of this affects who we are, because we don't compartmentalize ourselves. We don't go into work as robots, right? We are full human beings who go into work and do what we have to do, say what we have to say. So I'd like to sort of touch upon the aspect of what are hygiene practices for good mental health, and in the larger context. And I want to specifically speak to the idea of work where mental illness is concerned. So for that, I'll give you a little bit of a background. I quit, for the first time, I quit full-time work when I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder. I'm not going to explain what they are because it takes a while and it's really hard to sort of explain, but to put it very quickly, borderline personality disorder can only be, it affects everything. It affects your relationships, it affects your work, it affects every area of a human being's life. Borderline personality cannot be treated with medication. It has to be done with rigorous therapy and practice of therapy. Bipolar disorder is so far considered to be a physiological or a neurological mental illness, which can be helped with medication. This is the distinction. So I've been diagnosed with both. And in bipolar disorder, as a lot of us know, there is an element of not elements, the other side of it is depression, which a lot of us are more familiar with. So about 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with both these disorders, and it actually brought my world down. Right? I was a single mother then. I mean, I still am, but I was a single mother to two very young children then, and I found that I couldn't work, right? I couldn't be productive. I couldn't do anything. Forget taking care of my children. I couldn't meet deadlines. These are things people are paying you for, that you will be held accountable to in very, very quick terms. They're not family, they're not friends that will give you a long rope. So I found I was unable to work, and that's actually why I sort of reached out to a professional and said, you know what, my life is falling apart around me. What's going on? And that's when I was diagnosed. So within this context, I will first go with general hygiene practices for a lot of us who do not have diagnosed mental illnesses and yet find that our mental health is affected by our circumstances, and how we handle ourselves at work and how we handle work. So one of the things that usually is interpersonal relationships at work that affect a lot of us. We are either we either don't know how to communicate properly with our colleagues, or we have certain personalities, right? We're all different personalities that don't allow us to be like everyone else, or the stress of a job, or fighting with your own self-esteem issues that I'm not doing well enough. There's a lot of that in the workplace. A lot of it just can be taken care of by, and when I talk about how workplace affects our mental health, I'm talking about working hours, I'm talking about a good environment, I'm talking about no harassers on the team, I'm talking about all of those things that make it a conducive place to work in. Some very basic practices that I found are helpful to give your best at work or meet challenges where mental health is concerned, is one of the basic things is to keep a personal log for yourself. A lot of us don't do it. We know our achievements on a daily basis. We know what we're doing, all of that, but it's all in our minds, right? And today there's so much going on. There's an absolute overload of information on our minds. And it's not just about being online and reading stuff. It's about connecting with your friends, because you can keep in touch with 25 years ago, you'd probably be able to keep in touch with um, 5, 6 of your friends who lived in the same city. Now we're in touch with every friend who lives everywhere, right? And it doesn't have to be daily touch, but you know what's going on. And, whether you see their Instagram posts or whether you see their Facebook posts, you know what's going on. And that affects, it sparks off some thought, it sparks off something. So there's a lot going on in your mind. It's not easy to keep a log of your successes, your growth at the workplace. One of the basic things that I suggest for mental hygiene is just keeping a log of your success. It doesn't have to be an elaborately, beautifully written diary. If you can do it analog, great. If you're doing it digitally, okay, but it's a nice excuse to take some time away from your screen and practice your handwriting, write it down in a beautiful book. And those are all things that really make you feel good in the head. It slows you down to be able to think, when you write with your hand. So keep a log of what was good today at work. Did you enjoy a conversation with someone? So maybe quickly write that conversation down, just as a reminder so that it stays in your head. Definitely write down your wins, but also maybe write down your not so great moments, so that maybe when you go back to it later, you probably may learn something. So in my personal experience, what happens is, before I started to keep a log, I would forget even the not so great moments or my failures, right? And I wouldn't learn a lesson from it, which is important to do, sort of be cognizant of your failures so you can learn from them, and also be cognizant of your wins, even if it's a small win, saying today I made my colleagues laugh. It's a good feeling to make your colleagues laugh, especially if you're women. It's, for me at least, it matters a lot more if my woman friend laughs than my male friend. So it feels really nice to, if it's a small win, what can you learn from it? That's one thing. Keep a good log. To make it most effective is to sort of maybe review it at the end of the week. Just quickly go through your personal log and review at the end of the week and see if something pops out that allows you to reflect and sort of handle something. Another way this helps is to just put, what it does is, if a problem looks this big, when you actually write it down, it actually comes into perspective, because you've taken the time to write down what the problem is, and you've taken the time, so then your brain is doing its work and automatically figuring out solutions, right? So you're not doing anything, your brain's doing the work for you. So it's a great way to sort of reduce stress. It's a great way to problem solve, right? So this is one very good mental hygiene practice.
Awesome tip. That is such an awesome tip. Honestly, I think we just manifest, if any small issue, like just before getting into this call, a client called and blasted for something. And that is like getting manifested in my brain when I'm talking to you also, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
coming back. I might as well write it off and say, look at it later.
Exactly. So that's the thing, right? If you can just take out 5 to 10 minutes in a day to sort of make that log and, see things in perspective, so it makes a massive difference. Another, I think, really important hygiene practice when you're dealing with, so there are some people who are cool as ice, right? Inside and outside, they're very steady. They have a very solid mental and emotional framework, and very little bothers them, right? But not all of us are built like that. So for those of us that aren't, a good practice is to actually read a little more about what is happening. So for instance, I continue to have a huge problem with being ticked off, right? By a boss, by a colleague, by a superior. So it's not something that it's not like I get angry or upset. I start to beat myself up really badly. say, oh my God, you've screwed it up, you've messed it up, all of that. And then I started to read about, like, what am I doing to myself? Self-criticism at its worst. And going back to the earlier point, the problem is about this big. But by the time I finished beating myself up and criticizing myself, in my head, that problem is that big, right? And so I started to read about self-criticism. I started to read about, this is such an overused term, but I really have no other words for it. I mean, you've got to live it to understand what it means. For the longest time, I didn't know what it meant, but being a little kinder to yourself, right? The time that I understood what being kinder to myself meant was when someone said to me, if your friend made this mistake, or if your 5-year-old child made this mistake, would you speak to them in the same way? And my answer was an emphatic no. And this person was like, then why would you speak to yourself like that? Why would you tell yourself? So that's when I sort of understood first time what it meant to be sort of kind to yourself. So that's an important factor, right? To figure out what being kind to yourself means and how to be kind to yourself. You're not going to get it overnight. It's not going to come to you. And maybe it'll take a year for you to figure out how to be kind to yourself in a balanced way. So being kind to yourself doesn't mean doesn't mean excusing yourself for bad behavior or for not being ideal in a work situation. It just means if it's a genuine mistake, there's no need for you to beat yourself up about it. And it might take you a while to figure that out, but it's worth pursuing that and keeping that idea in your head. How do I be more kind to yourself? And this is also something that's a regular practice. We don't think about it often, but it's a good thing to start consciously thinking about it. I think the other thing is to be absolutely honest at your workplace, right? Whether that's, now being honest is a privilege, right? Not all of us can be honest, simply because we don't know how it will reflect on us. Many of us cannot say, I don't care about consequences, and I'm going to be honest. We cannot afford to say that because the consequences might be losing our jobs, losing our livelihoods, right? But I think if there is a space for honesty, either with your colleagues or with your superiors, then you must learn. We must learn to be honest without blame, without making excuses for ourselves. It's a hard thing to come by, but it's a good thing to talk through, and it's great when a leader sets an example of being honest, right? I know when in one of my jobs, my boss called me. She saw that everything was a bit scattered and she called me and, this thing hasn't been done. What's going on? So I said, I was shifting houses, whatever. And then she said, look, this is what I think of you. I want you to shine. I want you to be here. And these things are not acceptable. And the way she put it across was wonderful because I didn't find myself getting defensive and I didn't find myself making excuses for myself. I just said, thank you. So it really, for leaders, if we want to build that culture of healthy team members, we need to start with ourselves. We need to start being honest and we need to start being thoughtful in the way we approach. It's always a good practice. And finally, I think it's finally a practice if you can afford it and if you can, if you have access to it, is to spend some time with a therapist or a life coach or a mentor. There's a lot of conversation about mentorship and everything, but you don't have to be diagnosed with a mental illness to go to a therapist. There are many ways that a therapist can just do sort of certain corrections and then you're set. So if you can afford it, I think going to a therapist, going to a life coach is a really good example. The other tips are all, we all know, eat well, spend time with your family, do the things you love, all of that is there, of course. But these are 4 things that help maintain a decent, steady thing at the workplace.
Sandhya, I have this burning question, okay? Was when you came out saying that I have a mental health issue, weren't you pushed? Wasn't it a taboo? Didn't people look at you differently? How did you have the courage to do that?
So it took me a year after diagnosis to it took me a year to assimilate my diagnosis and to understand my diagnosis. And I still don't think I understand it fully. It took me a year of living with it to actually, and not thinking about it, obsessing about it, planning, saying I'm going to do this, with nothing, to feel the weight of the diagnosis. For a year, 1 full year, I was diagnosed, I think in 2013. Yeah. And a year later is when I first time wrote on my blog about my mental health diagnosis. And it was when the weight of the diagnosis hit me that I couldn't but write about it. You know, I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about how it's going to affect my family. I didn't think about, in fact, I wrote about it just after my first attempt at suicide. So it was, I tried to commit to suicide twice. And it was after my first attempt that I actually wrote about it, because the weight of that diagnosis and what it was doing to me and what my life had meant till I was 33. I was diagnosed when I was 33. It was then that it struck me. So if you were to ask me, how did I find the courage? I didn't find the courage. I just needed an outlet to sort of talk about what was happening. And I wrote it on my blog. I didn't care whether people read it or not. But strangely enough, it must have spoken to some people, because that blog post went viral. And I had so many people writing to me saying, oh my God, I go through the same thing. Oh my God, my sister has gone through the same thing. Oh my God, this sister. That's when I sort of opened up and I said, my God, there's a massive number of people out there who have these illnesses and nobody's talking about them. So if you ask me if it was courage, it was not courage. It was mostly a desire to document what was happening with me. By then my job was suffering quite a bit because of my illness, and I didn't know what the future looked like, you know. So at that point I was just like, okay, we'll see whatever happens. I'm just going to write it anyway.
This is so strong, actually. I must share a story with you. One of my colleagues recently called me and she's looking for a job. Okay. I have worked with her in 2002, 2003. Amazingly efficient woman. Okay. So I said, Ari, you will get job anywhere. Why are you, writing to me? She's put her on LinkedIn saying, I'm looking for a job and all that. She's come back from Dubai. So then I said, okay, send me a resume. So she sent me a resume, and her last job, like before she went to Dubai, was in Mumbai with one of my clients. So I said, do you want me to talk to them, or why don't you yourself talk to them? You work with them, just ask them to hire you back. So her thing was that she was going through an abusive relationship and her mental state was not right. And this organization will not hire her back. So Sandhya, from your medium, I really want you to tell the corporate which is watching you that can we give opportunity for people who want to get back to corporate after having a bout of a mental health issue? How we owe it to society, right? We need to give it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So how do these corporates become more empathetic towards it, and when all these issues are put on table? Because this lady is back in action, she can be the one she was, right? So how can we do? Is there any way, any message for these corporates?
I think so. You know, when leaders and corporates and employers really understand what it means to play to an employee's strength, then it stops being an issue. Then mental illness stops being an issue, right? When I speak of mental illness, let me categorically state that I'm talking about mental illnesses like depression, bipolar disorder, and other personality disorders, and not something as severe as schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorders. There are a few disorders that are just that's heartbreaking, because there are people who cannot live their lives with schizophrenics, for instance. It's really, really hard to live a normal life. You and I cannot even imagine the kind of pain that brings. So that's a separate category of mental illness, and I'm not talking to that. I'm speaking to the garden variety mental illnesses that a lot of us serious in their own right, but that doesn't really stop us from being excellent professionals. One of the things that I think corporates need to do is to have their employees talk about vulnerabilities, right? So open up those spaces where corporates can talk about, it's okay to say I have major depressive disorder, it's bipolar disorder. So it has to be a collaboration. An employer has to create the space for an employee to speak up, and two, the employee has to find the conviction that they need that their experience might help other people. So it's actually collaborative, with more onus on the employer, of course, because to talk about these things, you need a safe space. But employees also need to start talking, and it doesn't have to be a formal official thing. Talk about it during your coffee break, when you go out for a smoke, when you go out for your team lunches. There should be an opportunity to, it's I've seen, when I go out for a lunch or for a dinner, and I find like there are these, teams that have kind of like 18, 19 people at a table, and there's a lot of ha-ha, hoo-hoo going on. Why can't, and it's okay, yes, everyone is there for a light time, for a time free of stresses. But my question is, why can't we use an opportunity like that, maybe once 6 months, to talk about things in an informal way, about the things that plague us, right? If you have diabetes, two people who have diabetes in a team will keep talking about it, like share notes and discuss this, and all sorts of things. Oh, this diet, this doctor, this medication, whatever. There's so much conversation going on about it. When you have, like, I don't know, a skin allergy, right? Two people share a skin allergy, they talk about that. So I think we need to, and this is not something new, awareness and sort of raising awareness is really the way to sort of get that out. But also, I think talent acquisition teams should start working this bit into policy, right? Because now getting a disability certificate from the government for mental illness is not easy, right? It's entirely at the discretion of the committee that you face, that you get a recognition as a mentally ill person. The good thing about getting recognized as a mentally ill person is that you cannot be denied work because it's categorized as a disability in the Disability Act. But it's a hard thing to get, right? It's not easy to get certified by the government as mentally ill and eligible for benefits. So if corporates and employers take over that and say, you know what, we're going to build our own policy to sort of figure out mental health, people with mental illnesses, I think that's a great step forward. And I think people like you, people who work in the talent acquisition HR space, are the ones who can actually effect that difference going forward, because there are a whole bunch of young people who are afraid, who are very talented and very motivated, who are afraid to sort of, open up about this. And then, of course, when it's worked into the policy, then you can make allowances for having a couple of days off if a person is just completely unable to, function, or push for an insurance company to help with mental illnesses, right? The very few insurance companies that Actually, I think zero as far as I'm concerned, that address mental illnesses in their insurance policies. It is on so many levels that corporates can work, but first it has to start with the acceptance that these things exist, and we need to work around them.
Yeah, normalizing it, making it a coffee table conversation. I think that's the first step, as you rightly said. Yes, I will try and get this lady a job. I'll try my best to get her a job, because that is what we should be doing. I feel if one person takes charge of another one, at least that
100%, 100%, and that really is the epitome of what feminists call sisterhood, but also about humanity. If we can just look sideways and say, hey, how can I help this person? And let me do everything that I can. I'm so glad you put it the way that you did, which is, if I take charge of one person, maybe the world will be a better place. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thought. It's a beautiful thought. You don't have to do fabulous things that affects hundreds of people. That one person is enough.
So, Sandhya, we have been in a amazing conversation. Okay, so to wrap up this whole conversation, are there any tips from you for working women? I remember in our earlier conversation, you were speaking about having full-time work as a cornerstone. I think that's a beautiful message. Would you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about it when you said I will try and help this person find a job. And I was thinking, there is no bigger favor you could do that person. You could, lend her money if she needs to get through the next few months. You could take her out for a couple of dinners, drinks, whatever, and ease her mind. But the biggest thing you could do for her is to find her a job. And not just because she will be financially independent, but also, more importantly, because in my experience, work has been the rock of my life. I quit work. I quit my job, a journalism job, in 2013 when I was diagnosed. I freelanced for a couple of years. It was financially extremely difficult. I have 2 children. My parents had to support me at the age of 33 to 35. My parents had to support me. I have zero financial support from my ex. So my parents had to support me. And for a 33-year-old woman, to have her parents support her is a huge hit to your pride as well as your ego, right? But well, that was it. 2.5 years, my parents supported me financially. And then I found work. I cannot tell you what I went through when I started work. I had zero confidence. I had zero faith in myself, and I had no money. So when I started work, I was like, I'm going to mess this up, But I started work and I slowly started to build. And who I was when I found that job, and 2.5 years later, when that startup sort of wound up, there were 2 different people, If what a common element to a lot of mental illness is incessant worrying and anxiety, right? If I had like 900 anxiety before I started work, by the time my company wrapped up, I had like 50, simply because I could pay my bills, because I could afford to buy my children some things. I could afford to go out to a dinner with my friends. I could afford to buy presents for the people I loved. For 3 years that I didn't work, I couldn't do any of this because I had no money, right? And these are important things, because you have people giving you all the time, and then there's no, way to give it back. And that started me thinking about work and what it does for sanity, right? There are many things here. One, just the routine that going to office gives you. You get up in the morning, you do whatever you do, whether it's cooking, sending your kids off to school, whatever your routine in the morning is, that's a set thing, right? And at 41, I will never again underestimate the importance of a routine in my life. I hated it as a young person, as an 18, 19, 25, 30-year-old even. I'm like, why do I need a routine? What the hell? I don't need any of it. But at 41, the kind of peace, literal peace routine gives me is fantastic. So in the morning, you have everything set going. It might be chaotic, all right? Your routine might be chaotic in the morning, especially if you have children and all, and you've got to wrap them up, send them off to school, or it's really chaotic. But it's chaotic every day. It's steady, it's consistent. And that's a great thing. Going into office means you cannot not comb your hair, you cannot not have your bath, you cannot wear jhallu clothes and just, walk in. You've got to make yourself presentable. You don't have to do like extreme makeup or anything, but your clothes will be ironed, your hair will be brushed. And because you're stepping out, you'll put on a little lipstick, a little kajal, whatever, right? Or you may not, but at least you're clean and fresh. So just the act of having a shower is a massive boost to how you're feeling for the next few hours. The water cleansing you, relaxing you is a massive boost. If you're stepping out of the house, more likely than not, you will shower, right? And finally, getting into work and blocking out everything that you worry about, right? At home. So, whatever's going on at home, it might be the back of your mind, but largely you're with a team that you enjoy working with more or less. You have set targets that you have to meet, and you have a purpose for that day. Your life may not have a larger purpose. Ideally, if you can have a larger purpose in life, you're set. But if it doesn't happen, at least that day has purpose. That day you feel good. A lot of people now diss the culture of productivity, as they call it. But believe me, being productive keeps me happy, keeps me sane. Leading to the last point, connected to productivity, is the fact that you start to achieve things at work. When you're applying yourself, you start to achieve things. You fail, sure, but you fail as a team, right? When you achieve, more or less people, you achieve as a team, sure, but they acknowledge you individually as well. You're acknowledged, even if you're not acknowledged individually, you come back home and I said, boy, I did this today. And that is such a boost to your self-confidence, to your self-esteem, even if nothing else is working out in your life in that moment, and eventually it will work out. But in that moment, is everything is shattered. A little win at work in your competency is one of the nicest things. And it's when I started to discover these things that there was stress, there was me not performing now and then at my workplace. There was me disagreeing with colleagues. There was all of the usual gamut of things that comes with being a working woman. But when I step back, 3 years after that last job, I step back and I think about it. I remember only the wins. I remember how well I did. I remember how the things that I created, and that just adds to my self-esteem, to my confidence. So really, if you start to view work and finally the security that having money gives you, that you're able to pay your rent, and if you don't pay rent, if you live with your parents, if you live with your family, that you're able to maybe take your family out for dinner one day and pay for it, or that you're able to buy life insurance, or you're able to buy something that is lasting for your children. There is so much that adds to your self-esteem. And really at the heart of many mental illnesses or disorders is bad self-esteem as well, right? So when you apply yourself at work, despite, and I'd just like to add a little thing here, mental illness is not something that is selective about who it affects, right? It affects you, it affects me. It could very well affect the lady who works for me, and it probably does. A few days ago, I was having a conversation. Her husband's an alcoholic, and he doesn't beat or anything, but he's just foul-mouthed, and he's an alcoholic, and he spends all the money that he gets his hands on. She works 3-4 places, earns the money, runs the house, all of it, the usual story. So a couple of nights ago, I heard him scream. So when they lived close by, I said, why was he screaming? So she started talking about her life. And she said, this is why I take 6 ghar ka kaam. 6 houses, 6, 7 houses she works at. Because if she sits down for 5 minutes, She says her mind is full of anger and anxiety, and she doesn't want to uh, focus on it. She'd rather work. That keeps her sane. And it was a validation of what had been forming in my head that, hey, work is a way to be sane, you know. And when I heard her say it, I'm like, there are scores of invisible women like her who come to work, and because that keeps them sane. They don't have the luxury of, I'm taking a mental health day off. They don't have the privilege of a psychiatrist or a psychologist. They don't have the privilege of a family to support for 2 days if you don't go to work. Nothing. They've got to do the cooking, cleaning in their own homes and come back and do everything in their employers' homes. I think it's a good thing if you can, if you are not diagnosed with a massive mental illness, it's a good thing to look around the people that we don't usually see, the women who are invisible, and take lessons from them.
Awesome. Awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being there with us, because a lot of people do not speak about mental health. Mental health remains to be a taboo, especially women. Women think we are mentally strong. That's a statement I've heard.
It's terrible. It's terrible. And mental strength is not static, right? It's up and down. Some days you don't feel strong, and some days you feel strong, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?